What's going on, everybody? Welcome to the Filsinger Games Character Spotlight with Mike and Brock.
I'm Mike.
And I'm Brock. And we have two special guests with us here tonight. We have Tim Dalton and Stu Lowry from the Legends team.
Hello, everyone.
Hey, folks.
Well, since we have some uncharted territory, guys, did you guys want to do your weather bit?
Yeah.
How's the weather in Buffalo?
It's warm, humid, and raining for the last couple days.
Oh.
I will say that I'm very lucky to be on because we have had a major electrical storm come through. So if you guys suddenly lose me, that's why.
It's not because you just decided to go to doze off on us.
No, that's correct. I am committed to the end of this show, or as long as my power allows me. The lights dimmed about 15 minutes ago, and I thought I was not going to make it, but I am here. So
Good news, Stu. When you get bored, you can just say, "Oh, power went out."
Hey, power went out.
Yeah. Okay, I'm fed up with these guys. Power's out.
Good move.
Built an excuse right before it. I like that.
That's good.
Yeah.
Set the expectations.
The humidity's out of here, so we're good. Yeah, set them low.
I'm sitting at like 20 degrees and raining right now.
You got this whole Celsius thing,
though,
dude.
Celsius
You got to freaking,
man. Come on.
you know.
We need a conversion chart.
I think it's probably somewhere in the 80s.
All right, there you go.
That's
just a guess. I have no idea.
Here in Pittsburgh, it's in the high 70s and super disgustingly humid.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think we're pretty close to that.
One thing though, Stu, when I listen to the Uncharted Territories, I'm also a fellow eggnog lover.
Ah, hey.
There you go.
Cheers to you, sir.
I buy all kinds. My favorite is Nestle eggnog in the blue cartons. Hands down.
They don't sell it in plastic bags?
No.
Only the milk? Just the milk?
Only milk, chocolate milk, and white milk.
Okay.
1% homogenized, 2%. All come in bags.
The things that happen in backwards third world nations.
Yeah, I've been very particular or have developed a taste for Southern Comfort eggnog as of late. So that is my eggnog of choice. We'll see if that lasts.
I have heard you talk about that. I was like, that might be something to try to get a hold of at one point.
It's good stuff. Highly recommended.
But let's start off with our topic while we're here. Since we have some Legends people, we'll talk about the NWA. Now we had Chad and Corey on, who are synonymous with AWA because they love it. So I'm like, hey, NWA. Tim was the first guy I ever met that had been to an NWA show.
Even though he grew up in WWF territory, but that's okay.
And Stu, talking to you over different times, I knew you were an NWA fan. So I'm like, hey, this will work out. So what are your favorite memories about NWA wrestling?
Well, Tim, I guess I'll start since you were in Buffalo.
Go ahead, Stu.
My earliest memories and some of my fondest memories, because it involved watching it with my brothers, would probably be around 73, 74. Those are my earliest memories of Mid-Atlantic Championship Wrestling, which is growing up in Central Virginia. That was the promotion that we had. We watched it on TV each and every Saturday. It would come on right before ACC basketball. So I had a double whammy of two things I absolutely love, pro wrestling and college basketball. And my favorites, and they're as clear in my head as they were watching it on TV at that particular time, were Paul Jones, Wahoo McDaniel, and Ricky Steamboat. I remember them. I can't remember necessarily matches, although I've gone back and looked at a lot of footage over time, collecting tapes and then DVDs. But I can remember their interviews. I remember Wahoo's interviews. I remember Paul Jones' interviews because I was, 6, 7, 8 years old. But for an impressionable young man, it was certainly, I fell in love with pro wrestling immediately. These were larger than life cartoon characters on the screen in front of me. I have stuck with it ever since. I can remember Wahoo McDaniel in his interviews. It was always pretty fiery. Paul Jones is a little more understated. He was a major baby face at that time. He certainly had a great heel run, but when I was watching him, he was my hero. Yet another testament to our regional heroes in terms of what we remember, because I remember Paul Jones as being a total top of the card attraction in Mid-Atlantic Championship Wrestling. And when I would talk to other people, nobody ever heard of him except what he was, a cheesy manager. So I mean, we all have our memories particular to the regions in which which were hot when we were growing up. So those are some of my fondest memories. And then one of my brothers told me it was he called it fake back then, and my heart was broken, and he might as well told me there was no Santa Claus. So that was the end of it.
What about you, Tim?
I guess for me, really when I started watching wrestling, we had two options here. We had WWF and the NWF, the National Wrestling Federation, that was a Buffalo, Cleveland, Pittsburgh area fed, headlined by guys like Johnny Powers, Luis Martinez, people like that. And they would bring in talent from Toronto, Detroit, surrounding areas to kind of fill out the card as well. And so guys got to work different territories, but you'd see a lot of the same guys from Detroit wrestling in the NWF. So you'd get the Sheik, you'd see Bobo, Tex McKenzie, a lot of these guys would kind of travel back and forth, the Love Brothers, and they were up in Toronto as well. But you would see a lot of different talent kind of going through, but that only lasted until about 74. And the WWF went off TV until I believe it was around late 1980. And then finally came back on. And that's when I got hooked on wrestling again, was when it came back on an independent station in Rochester, New York, where I grew up. And so as I started getting into it, I started buying the magazines, all the magazines that were out there, and learning about all these other different territories that were going in the early 80s. And I found out that Mid-Atlantic actually used to run Buffalo, because I think they'd probably run Buffalo before they were going to their show in Toronto, and they kind of stopped there. But it was through Tunney, I think, that they had the Buffalo connection. So I started in Rochester, which is east of Buffalo, about an hour and 15 minutes east. I would try tuning in. This is back in the old days when you had TVs with like rabbit ears, and you're putting tinfoil on there. And I could get Channel 2 out of Buffalo that was carrying Mid-Atlantic Championship Wrestling on television. And I still remember one of the first things I ever saw was a huge angle with Ric Flair as a babyface, going after the Andersons, Ole and Gene Anderson. He had like an aluminum baseball bat, and he's banging the ring post with the bat, going, "That's you, Gene Anderson. Boom. That's you, Ole Anderson." And he's just going off. And I'm like, wow, this is a lot more fiery. And the interviews are a lot different than the stuff I'm seeing when guys are just kind of standing next to Vince McMahon going, "Well, Vince, this is what's going to happen," and blah, blah, blah. So it was just kind of a different thing. And so I got my parents, luckily, kind of indulged me, because they were wrestling fans as well. And we used to go up to Toronto quite a bit during the summers. And so we started going to wrestling shows, and they would advertise Maple Leaf Wrestling. And so we started going up there. And I think the first one I went to was in 1983. And saw some great shows up there, matches that still stand out in my mind. The first ever Mid-Atlantic title match in Toronto, Ivan Koloff against Ricky Steamboat. Ivan Koloff was the champ, defending against former champ Ricky Steamboat, and he won with a handful of tights. But it was one of the best matches I've ever seen live. And the other one that stands out for me from Toronto was Andre the Giant against Roddy Piper, which Piper used to actually talk about in promos when he would come to like Rochester and Buffalo back in his WWF days. He would mention that because he knew there were probably some people that were there and saw it. So but those are the ones that kind of stick out in my mind when the NWA was still, a meaningful organization.
I remember you telling me some stories about matches in Toronto, and so I relayed them to like when I was trained. It was by Smith Hart, Moondog King, Angela Mosca, and Waldo Von Erich.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember you telling me that you were terrified of Waldo.
Oh, as a kid, yeah, I was terrified of Waldo as a kid. I mean,
and the match with Mosca versus Slaughter for I think the Canadian NWA title.
Yeah, the Canadian Heavyweight Championship.
And Slaughter was inside the ring and Mosca was on the outside, and he pulled him in, but Mosca's feet were dangling on the top rope and he was counted out because his feet were over the top rope. And
yeah,
Mosca and I remember that match.
I think Big Ange and I had different takes on that match, because that got a lot of heat, and I think he thought it was just heat because he was the former champion that was challenging Slaughter, who was the champ, and he thought the fans were upset because they felt that he got screwed out of the title because he had Slaughter in the sleeper. Yeah. But the heat that I felt from the fans was more like, this was supposed to be a no disqualification match because their prior match had ended in DQ. So you thought this was going to be the blow off. And it turned out not to be the blow off because they did a count out in a no DQ match, and then came back the next month with a steel cage match that I wasn't able to go to because school had started up. So.
Yeah, because that's what he's telling me. He goes, it was a build up to make it even more, bigger for the steel cage match.
Yeah, I'm not sure that got the kind of heat that he wanted it to get, though. But there was a lot of pissed off people in the arena for one reason or another, for sure.
So what about you, Brock? You're the youngest of us. You missed a lot of the NWA heyday.
By the time I was aware, it was pretty much WCW. Trying to think of my earliest memories. I do remember that angle with Flair and the aluminum bat. I saw it on tape later. I remember him running in and running a whole bunch of people off and then hitting the different posts with the bat. So that popped right back in my head as soon as you started describing that.
Yeah, he did. That was one of those things where I was watching it on very fuzzy, snowy television, but it was still impactful.
Oh yeah, it was very intense. It felt real, for sure. But yeah, we were always Horseman fans in my house. I just remember them never winning a War Games.
Also 80 matches.
Yeah. But yeah, I'm a WWF kid, being from Pittsburgh, Bruno, San Martino, all that stuff, So I have very limited knowledge of the NWA, but I enjoy what I've seen on tape later on, but I didn't get to live it like you guys.
You guys were talking about Flair. He used to scare me as a kid. I have no idea. I mean, it was when I was watching him, his interviews were not all frantic Flair. In fact, they were somewhat calm and measured, but for whatever reason, he scared me back then. But I mean, he was a pretty big guy, and he would ramp it up sometimes in intensity. I just remember thinking Flair made quite the impression.
Yeah,
and I've been a Flair mark ever since, but I respected him. I guess I'll say that.
Yeah.
I remember my first things that stick out in my head, big feud and angles. The Boogie Woogie Man was taking on the Paul Jones and the Masked Assassins, but he was also feuding Exotic Adrian Street, so he was feuding a bunch of people at once. And he was fighting Adrian Street, back and forth. Their matches went every week. Something was happening, and then he had beat Adrian Street, and all of a sudden, the Assassins come to the ringside and just pummel the Boogeyman. Adrian Street turns and helps Jimmy Valiant, and I remember being completely blown away because this is, it's the first time I've ever seen a heel turn.
And Valiant had to be twitching because he loved to do the twitch when he was getting beat up.
And I just remember that, and then and then Dusty Rhodes made come in to even off the sides, and I remember that and watching Slaughter and Don Kernodle.
Mm-hmm.
Always fighting Youngblood and Steamboat.
Yeah.
And I remember Kernodle used to always do a test of strength and then drop kick the guy during a test of strength. I'm like, I love that. And that was the first time I remember seeing a bad guy going, I like when this bad guy wrestles. Telling my mom that, Don Cornudo was my first favorite bad guy that I liked to watch. Because he was just so sneaky and underhanded, and he did neat stuff. He wasn't the big, big powerful guy like Slaughter was huge compared to the other guys.
Valiant's yet another example of, here's somebody I only knew as Boogie Woogie Man Jimmy Valiant, crazy guy, happy-go-lucky, just whatever, on the fringe. I didn't know who Jimmy Valiant was as far as his Northeast presence. I had no idea this existed. So, I mean, back then, wrestling was just so, I don't know if you want to call it insular or isolated, particular to the territory you were watching. I had no clue he was part of the Valiants. I didn't know who they were. So, I mean, it's interesting y'all bring him up. Learning about him later, I'm like, wow, he had a career before this. Who knew?
Well, I think that's one of the things too about the magazines back then. I mean, you kind of read the magazines and get a little bit more history. Yeah. And I guess if we're going to talk about the NWA, just to do a little bit of a history lesson before we go, way off tangent. I mean, the NWA was an association of promoters that was formed in 1948. Where was that formed again, Stu?
And that would be Waterloo, Iowa.
Waterloo, Iowa. By God, we talk a lot about Waterloo, Iowa on our podcast. But yeah, so it was formed in Waterloo, Iowa. We actually got a tour of the place, the hotel that's now a senior living facility. But the hotel where the promoters got together and signed the documents to form the NWA, we actually got a tour of the hotel in Waterloo at the Hall of Fame one year. So it was a conglomeration of promoters that had, controlled most of the territories in the U.S. and some in Canada, and or I think Puerto Rico was part of it as well. But so and they kind of would elect a president every year and determine who the champion was, and the champion would travel to all the different territories and defend the title. So it was very unique in that now when you look at wrestling, you've got kind of one fiefdom in WWE and another contender out there in AEW, and a bunch of smaller little promotions, but they're not of any consequence really when it in the grand scheme of things when you look at it. But I always thought that was really interesting, and I'm surprised, given the history and the things about wrestling promoters and that you can read about them. I'm surprised the NWA lasted as long as it did, because I'm amazed that people could get along long enough to, let somebody make a decision and vote on champions when it's not your guy. It was kind of surprising, actually.
If you had to pick a favorite time period back in the NWA days, which would that be? I know I'm an 84 to 87 guy.
Well,
go ahead, Stu.
Go ahead. Okay. That is a good time period. I was not a time I was really actively watching Mike. I've gone back and watched tons of footage from that time period now. I have become very interested in the NWA's inception in terms of what was this? It was supposed to be Orville Brown, and he got in a wreck. Is that correct? To be the
Correct.
first world champion, and then they went to Thez.
Mm-hmm.
I've become interested when I read Thez's book. I got really, really interested in the inception of the NWA and Thez's first reign as champ. So I would put that up there for me. I wasn't alive then. I didn't see any of it, but it's just very interesting to me how Thez carried himself and how they were really trying, at least in some promotions, to present it as sport, and how Thez really set the tone in terms of what an NWA world champion should be, how he should look, how he should act, how he should speak. So I became very interested in that. But in terms of more modern NWA, if you want to call it that, while I wasn't watching, I've really gotten interested in, I'll call it 80 to 90, really Flair's ascension and Flair's reign as champion, the feud with Steamboat, even though he and Steamboat have joked that they did that same match, 562 times and nobody was filming them, that they did in their great trilogy later on. And I would still, the Flair Steamboat feud for me is probably my favorite of all in terms of NWA history. I think those later day matches still hold up now in terms of just incredible work by both. So I'll call that my favorite period of NWA wrestling, if you want to call it that, with a close second to the early years from what I've read and seen. I think those really fascinate me.
Yeah, for me, it's probably more like late 70s through maybe mid 80s, like when the takeover, when WWF started their reign of terror and taking everything over. I think that was just a great run for the territories back then. It's something that I try to read about and understand more. I think it was just a fantastic time. I mean, every place you would read about seemed to be doing well, and they all had these great cast of characters out there. And then probably second to that would probably be the Ric Flair. I mean, once Jim Crockett Promotions and WCW kind of settled in, that was kind of the only game in town at that point too. But I just really enjoy. I mean, they had some cream of the crop type guys there, and it was just fun watching because you knew every week you were just going to see some spectacular matches. So that would probably be the two for me. Although I do love the history as well. And I need to learn more about guys like Wild Bill Longson and Gene Kiniski and people like that in their title reigns. But, that'll probably happen down the road somewhere.
What about you there, Brock?
Definitely the Jim Crockett Promotions era. That's what I remember most. The Flair stuff, still remember that, watching that as a young kid, and just remembering all the promos and stuff were just amazing and believable compared to what was on the other channel.
What about the territories? If you had to pick a territory out of all the NWA territories, which one did you think put on the best?
Well, Stu, I wonder what you're going to pick.
In terms of the presentation I saw, Mid-Atlantic, that would be my favorite in terms of what they put on. And while you did have a lot of the outlandish gimmicks to some extent, they were reined in a little bit in terms of the time period I was watching, at least most actively. So yes, that would be my number one. It was more presented as sport. The one I guess I would say I wish I had seen was St. Louis. I really went through a period of time in which I was fascinated with St. Louis because I guess of all the NWA territories, being that was the home territory, if you will, they were the ones that presented it most as sport and really didn't allow a whole lot of wild antics. I mean, they said that. I've watched a few Dick the Bruiser matches in St. Louis. He got away with a lot. So I'm questioning some of that, but I wish I had seen more of St. Louis. I think St. Louis would have been my number one if I had seen it, but I'll go with Mid-Atlantic.
Tim?
I kind of like that whole Mid-Atlantic, Georgia, Florida corridor that they had going, because they would trade talent back and forth. And I just thought it was a great trio of, territories that just did a great job. Although if I was looking for some history earlier, I'd love to learn more about like Northern and Southern California, because that sounds like it was just a hotbed. Or even Hawaii. I mean, that's another one that I don't know anything about, or I know little about, that I would really like to learn more about, because it seems like they just had some great people out there.
Brock, your territory days, I know you really weren't around for them.
Well, I'll just say this. In an interview recently, Triple H gave Vince McMahon credit for wrestling selling out arenas. If anything, he did the opposite of that, because instead of having 25, 30 arenas selling out every Saturday night, now you have maybe one or two. So I would like to.
They were his one or two.
Exactly.
So that's what matters.
Exactly. Revisionist history. But I would love to see. I've lived during the territory days, because I have old copies of the magazines, and I still would pull them out and read them. Even recently, just all that history that people getting into wrestling now will never really get to experience, because there's one show in town. And I think we're really missing out as wrestling fans today.
Yeah,
I agree on that score, Brock.
I'm with Stu. In Canada, we really didn't get NWA. We got it on TV for a little bit, and then it was a 2-hour program, so you'd get an hour of wrestling and then an hour of roller derby. And
Nothing wrong with roller derby. I mean, you know,
Roller derby was awesome.
yeah,
it was. I was a bit of a fan of roller derby. I gotta admit.
and they came back to back. But what caught me was the St. Louis, because that's where our tapes would come from. So we'd get matches at the Chase. And I didn't realize, you know, I knew nothing about, I just knew it was wrestling from the Chase because that's where it was always from. And I didn't know it was, you know, I didn't know it was in like a hotel lounge type area. I knew nothing about that. I just would see it. It'd be the whole darkened arena with the light above it. And you'd watch the matches. But yeah, it was more realistic. I think that's what, you know, that there wasn't flashy. I really don't even remember ring entrance music. The guys would just come to the ring, and most of the time the matches would start with the guys already in the ring. But Mushnick, from what I understand, put on a great show for years. And after that, I think it would be like Tim said, Florida. Who was it? Graham ran the show down there.
Eddie Graham, yeah.
Yeah, and from what I heard, he was an amazing booker. Like the way he could finish matches. And so I recently, in the last few months, you know, I'll go onto YouTube and I'll start watching old Florida shows. And I remember watching one. I'm like, holy crap, is that Great Muta? Like the White Ninja.
The White Ninja, yeah.
I had only ever seen the White Ninja on, you know, in the rankings in PWI. You know, it had the Florida rankings, and the White Ninja would appear, and I never clicked in. I was like, oh, the White Ninja. So I'm like, okay, I'll watch this. I'm like, holy crap, that's a young Muta. I had no idea. It blew my mind. You know, like 6 months ago, I'm still learning stuff about different parts of wrestling because guys would wrestle from territory to territory sometimes and switch up their gimmicks. And that's one thing I thought was kind of neat with the old territory days.
Oh yeah. I mean, that's one of the great things was, you know, there were guys that were huge in certain territories that weren't that big in others. And sometimes you just catch on. I mean, sometimes you just kind of make a connection with the fans in one area and not another, and it works out.
Well, that was Paul Jones. And he was big in Florida too. But yeah, because I remember laughing with Chad years ago about Paul Jones. He's like, "What are you talking about?" Because I mean, I was telling him how stacked I would make that card in terms of overall strength if we ever got a Paul Jones, and he had not shared my memories of Paul Jones. But I mean, that happened all the time, which makes it fascinating to study this stuff because wrestling was such a closed business for so many years. It's only been in relative recent times we've had access to this. And Mike, you're talking about learning more and more. I doubt I'll stop learning about wrestling to the day I die with the stuff that just still keeps coming out and, you know, trickles here and there, and you learn more and more each year.
Yeah, like
hey, Mike, I've got a question for you. So up in Canada, I mean, there were a bunch of promotions going on there. I mean, the notable ones that people know about are probably Maple Leaf and Stampede. But I mean, you had stuff out of Montreal, you had stuff out of North Bay, you had stuff out of Vancouver. I think Halifax there was something headquartered in like Halifax. I mean, were they NWA affiliated? Do you know?
So we talked about this on our AWA show because the stuff out of Quebec was run by Gino Brito Jr. or Gino Brito Sr. and Andre. Andre owned that promotion with Gino Brito.
Okay.
And they do the booking, and they were an AWA affiliate.
Okay.
So, because I guess the AWA shut down during the summertime. So all the AWA wrestlers would come up to Canadian. It was called Canadian International, and Dino Bravo had purchased it.
Mm-hmm.
And they were way ahead of the time back then. You had like they were doing an invasion angle even before Japan did it, but it was the evil, you know, English-speaking wrestlers invading Quebec. So they had all the French-speaking wrestlers had to defend the province against the evil English, and they had a hardcore division. Like in 1984, there was a hardcore division with these guys. But out in Vancouver, that was NWA. It was NWA Vancouver, and it was run by Sergeant Al Tomko.
Okay.
And you had like Jake Roberts there. You had Crusher Von Haag, which was Roadwire Hawk.
Mm-hmm.
and you can see these guys wrestle, and you can watch the old matches, and Moose Morowski, the Frog, who was Al Tomko's son. He was a mass wrestler. And I tried to get into that so many times. I'd watch it because my buddy Craig would be watching it. And you'd see the wrestlers walk across the mat, and it was like they'd sink in the mat. It was so soft and padded. Like it looked like, those gym mats where, you do your amateur wrestling in public school, where they just pull that blue tarp with the circle over top. That's what it looked like.
That's awesome.
So in Vancouver, did they get a lot of trade then from did guys kind of swap back and forth from maybe Stampede or from Portland?
Portland, probably.
They got guys they got some guys from Stampede. They get guys from California. And because, Seattle's right there as well. Portland, they do some exchanges there.
Okay.
And Halifax, I really don't know much about there. I know guys ran out there because that's where Sailor White or Moondog King, he ran out there a lot. And so he would talk about wrestling out there. But
okay.
And North Bay, I think that was
that's another one of those laws. That's almost like, Arizona in the States or Hawaii. I mean, it's one of those lost
the
promotions,
Wild Man
I think.
The guy who wrestled with the bear.
Okay.
So he'd always, and I've seen a bunch of his shows when I was younger, because he would run in our area. And it was like he'd always book Crazy Chris Colt. The original Sheik I saw the original Sheik wrestle multiple times. Sweet Daddy Siki,
nice.
Rick Johnson, all these guys were on his Jet the Body Doug Star. All the, you'd have a lot of different guys. But I remember because he'd always show a picture on his posters, and it'd be like Ric Flair slamming Bob Backlund. And it's like, where? Oh, this will be a great match. Oh, what do you mean it's not on the card? But why is he on the poster?
It's a guy body slamming another guy. We're just trying to sell tickets.
It's wrestling.
So we're going to lose our feed in about a minute. So Brock will stop recording.
Yep.
And to continue, I don't think Calgary was affiliated with any one promotion. They would just bring in anybody that Stu would say. They would have WWF guys and NWA guys and AWA guys and Mid-South guys all cycle through bit by bit.
So even because I know they did that in Toronto as well, but that was technically an NWA. I thought that was, I thought because of Tunney, I thought that was kind of affiliated with the NWA, even though they would bring in Bockwinkel or Backlund or whatever.
I think Stu just held his own.
Okay.
That's why the WWF ended up buying him, because everyone worked for Stu.
Okay.
His boys had to be booked on top, but other than that, everybody was, him or the Bulldogs. That's who was getting booked top.
Mm-hmm.
But, that's when they ended up selling it all.
So once, once everything started to kind of crumble, when Vince started going in and taking all the top guys and all of that, I mean, there wasn't a lot really left. I mean, were you guys watching any of that stuff then?
Up in Canada at that point, we would have a lot of WWF. NWA had been taken off the air. Like WCW, that was gone. We had NWA Vancouver, which was called All Star Wrestling.
That's right.
And then we had the Canadian International stuff, which you brought some of that down to Jim Cornette, I think, and showed him down at Smoky Mountain.
Yeah, I showed. I think because I had the tapes, and I brought a bunch of tapes down there just because everybody was bringing tapes down. And
you said he was shocked. He had never even heard of the promotion.
Well, not Jim. I mean, I'm sure some of the folks there didn't know. Jim knows he knows all this stuff. So I don't think it would be him, but I'm sure a lot of people there hadn't heard with it or didn't heard about it or knew a lot about it.
And I know a guy from Montreal ended up buying the library, and he said he only bought it for like $2,500 because no one wanted it. Sat,
like the tape library.
Yeah.
Oh wow.
He now sells the tapes, online, and I ran into him at a card show. He was selling all Canadian International tapes, and I bought one because it had like Steve Strong versus Rick Martel feud on it. I'm like, ooh, I want that one. Where Martel smashes the actual beer bottle on his head and blood just starts pouring out. Can you get me to smash a stubby under your head?
What, Stu? I mean, so when did kind of WWF take over for you when you were?
I remember WWF specifically in 84, 85, about that time period. And I'm like, what the hell is this? And it was on Saturday morning. And I mean, don't get me wrong, Mid-Atlantic had squash matches, but WWF took the squash match and it was an art form. I would occasionally see some good stuff on Mid-Atlantic free TV. And WWF, I wasn't seeing any of that. However, that being said, I was intrigued with the presentation of WWF at that time. But I was always an NWA or Mid-Atlantic NWA, and then eventually when WCW broke, a WCW fan first versus WWF. It was just, originally the cartoonish aspect of it appealed to me, but after a while I was like, this is goofy because it just went too far. But yeah, I'm going to say mid-'80s, Tim.
Yeah, because I know once they started getting in with all the weird gimmicks and all of that, and Jim Crockett, I had that on cable at that point, and it was just kind of nice to have that alternative. And I got into that a lot more than I did the WWF stuff, even though that was my home territory, just because it made more sense. The matches were better, the personalities weren't as goofy, and it was better. And I just, having watched WWF when it was, still presenting wrestling like most of the other territories were in the early 80s, to what it kind of turned into with all the really over the top gimmicks and the goofiness. I mean, it kind of turned me off and turned me away from that product. I'd still watch the pay-per-views. But yeah, that's when I really kind of turned to Crockett and WCW.
Yeah, one of the things that made me actually like NWA better were the announcers. I always thought, no matter, even the territories had better announcers. If I'd get the old tapes and stuff, I always thought the announcer, but I hated Gorilla Monsoon's announcing more than anything. It was probably the only time I liked Gorilla Monsoon's announcing was when he used to do Maple Leaf Gardens announcing. And they would do one match, and it'd be him and Sir Oliver Humperdinck. And they'd announce, and it was, I remember watching, and I have it on tape somewhere too, and it's Greg Valentine versus Sam Houston. And they're like, yeah, Greg Valentine, former U.S. champion. And I'm like, wait, what? This is WWF. You shouldn't be saying. And they would go on and just talk about old, the guy's history before he came to the WWF. Yeah, Sam Houston, he's related to, and they'd say he's related to Jake Roberts. Wouldn't say how, but he's related. And I'm like, wait, hold on, what are these guys going to get in trouble? Like, but
no, you're right. I grew up on Bob Caudle as the voice of Mid-Atlantic, and then he went into the NWA/WCW days when WCW broke. But I will say David Crockett. I agree with you, and for the most part, Mike, on the announcers being better in the territories. But David Crockett only knew one gear. God bless him. It was full throttle, and he didn't get the nuances there all that much. And just every match was life or death. But other than that, Bob Caudle was great for me. I think he kind of gets short shrift in the discussion of great territorial announcers.
He was great on Smoky Mountain too.
He did do that. So I never saw any of that, but I realized he did that later, which I guess was the quick connection with Cornette brought him in. I would imagine. I don't know.
But yeah, I mean, when I was watching, because I had WWF. I mean, I don't really remember a lot about it. I was just a kid, so I don't really remember the announcers from the NWF. but we had Vincent Bruno and then Vincent Patterson. And Antonino Rocca was in there before Bruno was, but I didn't catch that. By the time I got it, Bruno was kind of the color guy. And Bruno, as great as he was and the charisma he had, just he wasn't a fiery guy when it came to announcing, and Vince was just over the top. And then when they got Patterson in there, it was he was just a little different, with the they joke around about his with the singulars and the plurals and stuff like that, and going banana, and all that kind of stuff. But I mean, he would do that, and he'd just kind of crack up. You'd be like, "What the heck is going on with this guy?" But I mean, I just and then once I started watching some of the other stuff, you see the Gordon Solys and the Jim Rosses and the Lance Russells, once you start getting tapes and finding this older stuff, and it's like, man, these guys are really good.
Mm-hmm. They were.
And you realize how much that kind of adds to the product too.
Totally. Gordon Soley sold it to sport.
If I go on a brief tangent here, with the passing of Vin Scully recently, who would you guys put on your Mount Rushmore of sports announcers that are non-wrestling?
Any sport,
just not pro wrestling.
Go ahead, Tim. I got to think about it.
Jack Buck, maybe?
Yeah, he's on. I was just thinking of him and Scully at least.
Yeah. If we can't do Vin Scully, because Scully he's got a Mount Rushmore of his own.
He does.
It's four views of Vin Scully would be Mount Rushmore of the sports.
I'd have Vin Scully, Jack Buck, Tom Cheek, and
Don Cherry.
No.
Mike Lang.
No, the guy. Now I'm just drawing a blank. Dick Vitale for college basketball. I loved him.
Dick
I like Vitale too. He was fun.
He was an acquired taste. I hated him as a kid, but I have grown to respect him. I get it. I wouldn't put him on my Mount Rushmore, but I get why you do. So I'd probably consider Dick Enberg, again, very excitable, but he was the voice of my football days as a youth. So in terms of watching football growing up.
Yeah, I picked Tom Cheek because he was the Blue Jays announcer for 4,200 consecutive games.
I think Mel Allen might be there for me too, because even though I didn't really hear him as a Yankee announcer, but he was the voice of This Week in Baseball, which I grew up watching.
Yeah.
Greatest show
ever.
everybody,
it's Mel Allen.
How about that?
Harry Carey, that guy was hilarious. By about the seventh inning, he hammered.
Yeah.
I couldn't really get into Harry. The one guy though I loved, even though he's not going to make many people's Mount Rushmore, but the guy I loved listening to on the radio when I was listening to Yankee games was Phil Rizzuto. He was just a riot.
I was going to say that, yeah.
I mean, you talk about going off on tangents. I mean, that guy, he wouldn't last until the third inning, and he's talking about the flight in, and he's talking about his golf game, and he's talking about a million different things other than what's going on.
It's like I remember watching one time Andy Van Slyke. He was big on he loved watching the Weather Channel, and so they allowed him to do the weather on a Pittsburgh on a Pittsburgh show. And he's on there, and he's like, "Here's the weather in San Francisco. Probably sucks because it's San Francisco." And he just goes on and he carves up every team. I go, Pittsburgh. Oh, weather's amazing here. And then he jumps on to the next town and just carves it up. It was one of the funniest things I've seen. And they only let him do it once, but
yeah,
they used to let Kurt Angle do sports here too. It was a disaster.
I bet that had to be pretty bad.
It was entertaining, but
yeah. I got one dark horse candidate for my Mount Rushmore of sports announcers. We got the Atlanta Braves for years. We had Richmond Braves. I grew up in Richmond. Richmond was a AAA affiliate for the Braves for many years. So the Braves by proxy were my favorite team for a long time. And we would get the Superstation, and I grew up with Skip Carey. And
Skip Carey was good.
Loved Skip Carey. He was funny, sometimes irreverent, just a great baseball announcer. So, Mike, I'd throw him on there as my fourth, just as a regional announcer.
Who was the guy that did, and I'm blanking on the name, and I know who it is. Who was the guy that did the Celtics games that would scream?
Johnny Most.
Johnny Most.
Yeah.
I mean, he's another one of those guys where
Total
not being a Celtic fan, he just annoyed the holy hell out of me. I was just like, man. And he had that voice, like this, and he's just, and I'm like, come on, you got to be kidding me.
Total homer.
But I could see why a lot of people. I mean, people in Boston freaking love that guy.
It was like the guy who came up with the nicknames for everybody.
Oh yeah,
Chris Berman.
Chris Berman.
Yeah.
And you're talking about minor league baseball. Tim and myself attended what to me, and I tell people, is my favorite all-time minor league baseball game. It went like 15 innings, and there were so many ejections that the pitchers were playing in the outfield. And it started off with the first batter. Umpires.
Yeah, the umpire strike zone was a bit erratic.
Yeah, and so the first batter of the game, outlines the plate with a bat. And I'm like, oh, no matter what pitch is thrown next, it's going to be a strike. And you see the bat catcher go, boom, catches the ball out here, and it's strike 3. And next thing you know, the manager comes out, and it's just I've never heard anybody put so many swear words together in my life. And then it just became, he bumped the up. You're out.
I think the mascot was coaching the team by the end of the game. It was crazy.
It was 15 innings, and everybody had been thrown. Like, there was no more bench players. It was, you're playing that position. Starting pitchers were playing in the outfield because they're out of position players, because everybody was getting tossed. There was no first or third base coach anymore because they've been tossed. It was an absolute single A nightmare train wreck. It was
yeah,
so amazing. It was hilarious.
Not to try and get this back on track at all.
Oh yeah, we can get on track.
But a couple things a few territories, I guess, that we haven't talked about. And I know Stu's a fan. Memphis, we haven't talked about really Memphis, and then world class with the Von Erichs, and what a hot ticket that was. And what was the other one I was thinking of? Oh, UWF or Tri-State or Mid-South or whatever you want to call it.
There were so many of these territories where they'd be hot for, like a New York minute, and then they'd go, and then suddenly they'd come back.
I believe that's a Nova Scotia minute for you, but that's okay.
And is that the same as a New York minute? Do they use Celsius?
Yeah, they do.
But it's a much slower minute.
I got you.
They have 100 seconds in their minute.
These Canadians have
There's
more
an
fun.
Exchange. Yeah.
It's a metric minute.
Yeah. Tim mentioned Memphis. Now there's a perfect example of me being a total snob about Memphis wrestling. I thought it was a punch and kick territory, not much to it. And I was so incredibly, unbelievably wrong. They kept playing the same towns night after night after night, year after year, kept getting good crowds, excellent storytelling. And Jerry Jarrett did an amazing job with that territory and had some great characters, some homegrown and some he would bring in. But that is I would highly recommend, if anybody wants good history of a territory, to read pretty much everything Mark James has done on Memphis wrestling, but specifically the books 1977, 1978, and I can't remember the other one.
1979. I'm just throwing that.
I know. I think it's 81 or 82, but they're yearbooks of the years. Yeah, it was a logical choice, Tim.
You
weren't
taking a big risk
with 77 and 84.
There you go.
Yeah,
and they're the yearbooks of an entire year in Memphis, and the history is just fantastic.
I think that's one of those places, and that was one of the longest survivors too.
It was,
after
they hung on.
And I just, that's one of those that I need to spend some money with Mark James and learn more about that area. I did get the book about Knoxville that's kind of like a history of theirs up till the 60s, and I thought that was phenomenal. But World Class too was another one where that thing lit on fire and had the great production values. You had people just going absolutely bananas for the freaking Von Erichs down there.
The old Sportatorium.
Yeah,
Yeah.
but when you would see that, it's amazing that those guys could even get to the ring, because the girls were just like all over those guys and just like dragging them and grabbing them and pulling them. And I'm like, holy crap, it's amazing these guys can get to the ring. Yeah, well.
And World Class was huge in Israel. I mean, they found out like Israel had watched on either tape delay or something. They had a huge following in Israel of all places.
Wow.
I think I have that right. I'm pretty sure it's some country, and I'm pretty sure it was Israel, but if I'm wrong, I'm sure promoters will correct me, but I think it was Israel that they saw them on tape delay and had a pretty big following. They were blown away by that when they were at their peak.
But that was one of those too, where, I mean, had some great talent going through there.
They did.
They had the whole Von Erichs Freebirds feud and all that, and then just kind of to the east. I mean, you had Bill Watts and
I've read the Bill Watts
Mid-South and UWF.
Pretty good.
Yep. We did for a very short time, for a few months. I think when we first got cable, or on maybe one of the independent stations in Rochester, we would get UWF wrestling. It didn't last long, but it was, it may have been Mid-South. I get the time frame kind of confused, but it was great stuff. I mean, you had Doc in there, you had like, all these guys, and it was like, holy crap, this is different too. And so I remember when we first got the VCR, I remember, telling my mom, hey, make sure you tape this stuff too. And I have no idea whatever happened to those tapes, but that was another great area that kind of developed around that time, that 70s to 80s kind of time frame. Sure. That just kind of went by the wayside once the takeover happened, and then they wound up kind of merging into Crockett.
I was listening to the Arn Anderson podcast, and he talks about them buying the UWF, and he says that was probably the downfall, what caused the downfall of Jim Crockett. He goes, because they paid so much money for that promotion. And he goes, and that all the towns were dead. He goes, we'd go there, and he goes, we'd draw 1,500 people. He goes, they ended up killing that town. And he goes, out of the guys, he goes, all we got really was Sting.
Yeah, I guess you did.
He goes, because Doc and he went over to Japan. Doug and DiBiase left to the WWF.
Mm-hmm.
He goes, Terry Taylor was there, one man gang. He goes, everybody just left.
Steiner's, I guess. You had Rick at that point anyway.
And he goes, so he goes, that killed us. He goes, that was kind of the downfall of WCW.
What am I remembering? And I don't know if I'm remembering this correctly. Was it UWF that was on USA Network for a little while, and they had a world title tournament of their own? Because I remember seeing that on TV and wondering what the heck that was.
I think
wasn't there a
gang won the first ever, didn't he?
I don't remember who won it. I just remember seeing a match that was promoted as a world title tournament.
Gordy, one of them.
Would that have been Southwest when?
Maybe it was like, South. Okay, maybe that was
that might have been because it was Adonis and Orton. I think wound up going into the finals on that one.
That's ringing true.
So I think that might be what you're.
Okay, all right. I remember seeing that on USA when it just randomly came across it, and I'm like, and then I read about it later, like, oh, that's what I saw, and I just didn't know what it was.
Yeah, there were a lot of things back then. I mean, because a lot of those places were trying to survive.
They were.
That's why I think it would have been amazing to kind of be around during those days when things were kind of thriving before everything kind of, kind of all got dropped into one bucket. I mean, just to be able to run around drive around or just go to some of these different places and see some of this. I mean, go to Amarillo and see the Funks, and then, you head over, even like Arizona, like I said, that's one of those lost areas too. Arizona, Gulf Coast, there, Hawaii. I mean, there's a bunch of those that somebody needs to do like an extensive book and research. We need to get Tim Hornbaker on that.
It'll be thorough.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. He'll be giving you like, oh, and here's the street address, and here's what they sold the building for in 1937. And
I just wish I paid more attention.
Yeah, I know. It was a golden age, and we just didn't know what we had.
Yeah, I pick up the PWI, every month, and I'm like, oh, Florida, and you're reading all these guys, and you never get to see them. You're like, who is Jeep Swenson?
Like, oh, Jeep Swenson, yeah.
And you read the Around the Horn on all the matches, so you can kind of get an idea of who these guys were, but you didn't know, and then you'd see a picture of them, and you're like, oh, this is a top guy in this promotion, and then you wouldn't realize it that he's somebody else in another promotion.
Exactly. And we're talking about, you had your show on the AWA with Apologies to the Olsons. And I didn't know who the AWA was until ESPN started carrying him. I'm like, what the heck's this? And how does it relate to the wrestling I'm seeing on my TV? So, I mean, I get some sense of them from the magazines, but I mean, and I'm being a little melodramatic, but I really had no sense of who and what the AWA was all about till ESPN showed it. So
yeah, AWA we kind of always got.
Yeah, we did
because they didn't have the rights to WWF, so it was TSN for us. So we got AWA, but they would stretch that out over a year. So they would just show repeat matches during the summer shutdown.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So if you missed it, you had a chance to record it.
There you go.
I just remember, I would read about it, but then when I remember when I first started seeing it, you'd look and they had a few guys that were a little long in the tooth, but even then. I mean, Bockwinkel looked great, and his ring work was still great, but you could tell that he wasn't a spring chicken, and they still, Vern was still kicking around.
Yeah.
The Baron, even though I love the Baron, I mean,
Baron's a guy from Mid-Atlantic days, and when I saw him in AWA, I'm like, holy smokes, it's got to be 100.
I think he's one of those guys that when he was born, he looked like
he did
50 years old,
He did. That's why, Tim, you and I will have our revenge when we're 80. I mean, we looked 80 when we were 40, so we'll look our age.
Hopefully we'll catch up at some point.
You got it.
But yeah, I mean, that was the thing that kind of ruined AWA for me. And I remember talking to Chad about this, and I'm like, when I heard Rick Martel was their champion in WWF, he was like a mid-level tag guy. And I'm like, Rick Martel's their champion. They must be freaking desperate out there. I mean, and I mean, he was always underrated. He was a great babyface. I hated him as a heel. I loved him as a babyface because that was what he was meant to do.
That's where I really started watching AWA was with they showed the match on TV up here when he beat Tsuruta, and
that's cool.
And I love it was huge, but I just remember being shocked because the same thing with you. I'm like, him and Tony Gurria were tag champs.
And they were great. They were great. Now that's a team that I always said, because they didn't really have a lot of athletic teams in there athletic heel teams in there at the time. I mean, Fuji and Saito were okay, but you had the Moondogs and teams like that. And I really wish they could have had a good run against like a team like Adonis and Murdoch when they came in, or something like that, just to kind of really showcase what they could do, because they were a very underrated team in my opinion.
I was just reading a thing a little while ago, and they talk about Kofi Kingston. He's like a 16-time WWF Tag Team Champion. And I remember them making a huge deal about Tony Gurria winning his 4th and setting a record.
Yeah,
I know. I miss those days. I mean, if a guy won a title twice, it was a big deal.
Right.
So,
right.
It wasn't how many times you won or lost, it's how long you kept the thing.
Yeah.
So
yeah. Bruno had to win it once to make it important,
You got it. You got it.
Then when you hold it for 8 years, it kind of gets you
You're
over.
a legend. Yeah.
And it gets the title over too.
Yeah.
That was kind of funny. But we should probably wrap up here.
All right.
Got to thank you guys for coming out, though.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah,
I had a ball. Thank you, Mike.
Maybe
Would you guys like to plug anything while you're here?
Well, we got,
Plug your t-shirt.
We've got our Uncharted Territory podcast.
Yeah.
This is what we do. you know, and by God, if you want t-shirts, I could tell you, you tune into that. I will tell you where to get the damn Uncharted Territory t-shirts.
Well, Tim, where do you get them now that we're talking about it?
Well, by God, Stu, what you do is you just go to tkostore.com. That's TEKO store.com. And it's all right there. You got your t-shirts, your hoodies, your underwear, your garbage cans, your lunchbox, all of it. It's all there.
That's fantastic.
All your school
news.
supplies with the logo. I mean, it's all on there. Just go and look.
Nice.
But yeah, but we've got the podcast going, and it basically, we talk about Filsinger Games stuff and the Legends realm of it. It usually drops. Corey Olson does the production on it, and everything usually drops on Fridays. Our upcoming show is going to be our big 2022 draft, where we kind of build on the 2021 draft, where we kind of released half of our rosters back into the draft pool, and then added all the new guys that have been released since. And that, so that our next show, which will be recorded tomorrow, but will be dropped on Friday, will be the draft. And I'll sneak preview. I have the first pick.
It does a lot of pressure.
Is it going to be Lord Zoltan?
We're only going with the color cards, so unfortunately, no. Otherwise, that might be an option.
Local Pittsburgh fave.
Yeah, that's right. I love Lord Zoltan.
I actually talked to him out at Waterloo this year. Kenny Jugan, who was out there this year. I got my picture taken with him, and
that's awesome.
Super nice guy. He got me actually when I was out of Cauliflower Alley one year. It was a year I had gone out alone. And I was looking to sit at a table, but I didn't want to intrude on, people's groups and stuff like that. But I was talking to Kenny Jugan, and we had a mutual friend in Brian Hildebrand, who was referee Mark Curtis.
Yeah.
And he's like, "Oh, you got to come sit with us." And I was at a table with Zoltan, Dominic DiNucci, and Count Grog, and I'm like, okay, this is like this is good for me. This is like I'm in my steel belt best here. So, but yeah, so Kenny Jugan is definitely over with me.
Awesome.
So, but that's about it. I don't think anything else to plug. It's just thank you for letting us come on and kind of shoot the breeze for a while.
Awesome.
Yeah, thanks for coming out.
Thank you guys. Really appreciate it.
We're glad to have you.
Stu, anything about Denmark you'd want to?
I reserve that for Tuesday nights, Tim.
Okay.
I just they get a special good night on their special night.
Jared only gets one goodbye per week.
That's it.
I'll say good night to Canada.
Okay, there you go. There you go.
I'll give Brock a plug with his is it Dance Club Wrestling?
Next Dimension Wrestling.
Next Dimension Wrestling.
Yes,
I don't know where I'm getting Dance Club.
That was my previous one.
Oh, all right, got it. I was looking over some of those bootlegs, and they could make some nice additions to my bootleg fed. So maybe ordering some of those eventually. They look like a lot of fun.
We'll get you a Nuclear Chaos.
Well, I was just going to say my Nuclear Chaos looks fantastic. So.
Oh yeah. I made sure all you guys got one.
Yeah. So well done. Digging that card. He's in my bootleg fed.
Chad made the delivery for you.
He did.
Good.
No, thank you very much, guys.
Well, thank you guys. There's all kinds of links below. Just check those out. Definitely listen to Uncharted Territory and go buy all the merch. Is that TKO?
TKOstore.com.
TKOstore.com. All right. Buy it. Awesome. Thanks, guys. Appreciate you being here.
Thank you.